suddenly Lando's the big favourite for the world championship. I don't know whether they've just discovered him or whether they've just looked at a picture of him and thought, wow, he's a cool guy, or whatever it is. I mean, he's the same driver that he was before, as far as I can see. So I don't know why everybody's suddenly jumping up and down about him. Of course he's going to go well. Of course he's going to win Grand Prix this year. But as I keep saying, his biggest problem is not Max, it's not Charles, it's not Lewis, it's not George Russell. It's Oscar Piastri. And actually the pressure from Piastri in the other side of the garage is something that Lando Norris, if this is going to be a championship year for him, does not need. Here we are, all these years later, we've basically got another Balest running the FIA, and we're all surprised. Oh, isn't it terrible? Well, it's not terrible. It just goes back to where we were, which is a ludicrous voting system where every country has one vote. And if you want to change it, change the voting system first. You know, if you feel that another driver deserves a whack across the face or whatever, don't talk about it. Do it.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the F1 Hour with my friend and yours, the greatest, no goatiest of F1 minds to have ever goated, the one that they call Peter D. Windsor. How are you doing, sir?
Well, I'm a bullient, mate, because I mean, I'm sure the entire world saw my post on Twitter, /X, yesterday morning, in which I wished all the best to Russell Henley going into the last round of the Arnold Palmer Invitational. He was flying P3, P2, P3, and he doesn't usually go that well on the Sundays. So I just thought, you know, come on, Russell, you can do it. And he won. He won. Unbelievable. Hold an eagle, got an eagle, hold a bunker shot or a chip shot on the final hole. And what I loved and why I'm such a fan of Russell Henley is because when that happened, and it was obviously then won the tournament, it was all very Arnold Palmer-esque. There was no screaming and shouting. It was just a polite handshake to his other partners, to his caddy, bit of a hug, and just took it all. And it's so nice to see. And it's an interesting, I don't know if we'll get into this in the chat today, Cameron, but I was thinking about this whole business of charisma and star power as defined by, I don't know, Netflix or Sky Sports or whatever they want to do. And the reality is charisma for me are people with that sort of charm. And that's why I am a Jim Clark fan, because, you know, he was demure like that. And so was Arnold Palmer in his own way. And that's why I'm a big fan of Russell Henley, and what a player as well. Very happy to see it. So I'm very happy. And I'm going to try and bring that energy of this thing on X now. Who am I going to apply that to for the Australian Grand Prix? Well, I tell you what, I'm starting to feel a little bit warm about Alpine. I'd love to see Pierre Gasly and Jack Doohan have a great weekend. Wouldn't it be brilliant? Particularly Jack. Everyone's talking about Oscar this, Oscar that, but Jack Doohan is not slow. And that car, you know, with the Merc engine, it's not going to be a bad car, I don't think. Anyway, I'm fine, thank you very much.
Let's go. Go on then, Mr. Windsor. Let me ask you, since you talk about Jack Doohan, we'll kick off there first thing. Yeah. Many have Jack Doohan in 2025 as a dead man walking, in the sense that they've signed Franco Colapinto already to a long-term contract as a reserve driver. What are the chances that Jack Doohan can see out 2025 as an Alpine driver?
Well, I don't know about the chances. What he needs to do to see out 25 and obviously continue through into 26 is have a great season. It's simple as that. And he needs to be there or thereabouts with Pierre Gasly. And if the car is good, he needs to be taking full advantage of that. And if he doesn't, by the law of whatever you want to apply, causality, then of course his place is going to be taken by the favoured son upon whom the sun shines and who can bring lots of money into the team. And there they will go. But if he has a good year, it's going to be difficult for them just to kick him into touch, isn't it? And don't forget, Pierre Gasly could have a brilliant year. It could be a great car, and he could win a Grand Prix or two, and he might get an offer from, I don't know, who knows, Mercedes, anywhere, you know, and he may leave. And then they might keep them, both of them. So, you know, it's a strong team. It's a very strong driver lineup, actually, I think, Gasly Doohan.
Is that fair, though, Peter? Don't you want to, when these new young, hungry lions, a.k.a. rookies, come into F1, don't you want to give them, like, some breathing space? Do you not suffocate Jack Doohan by imposing upon him all this pressure of
Yeah.
Colapinto and then handicap his ability to perform well in his maiden season.
Absolutely, for sure. I mean, if I was running that team, I wouldn't be doing that. I don't think the right way to get the best from a new driver is to put a massive amount of pressure on him from the back of the garage and the whole entourage watching his every move. That's not a good thing. We saw that with Dave Walker in 1972 when he was teammate to Emerson Fittipaldi. He was a much better driver than he looked in 72. Due to all the pressure that Peter Waugh put on him all the time. So yeah, obviously there are ways to manage them, but I was just taking the situation as it is. Given that we know there's this big love affair around Colapinto, then you have to address that. Yeah, but you're right. In a perfect world, you'd say, right, Jack, relax, do your thing, and let's enjoy the year. Of course, you've got to say on the other side of the coin, if it wasn't for Alpine, Jack wouldn't probably be in this position to be racing anyway. So there's a little bit of that, but he is talented. He's very talented. He's very good. And I hope they look after him and get the best from him.
Yeah. Good luck, Jack. Here's hoping, mate. I really wish the chap well. Go on then. Let's talk about 2025, Mr. Windsor. To save a dying puppy, Drivers' Championship. Who are you putting your money on?
Drivers' Championship. Well, I mentioned Charles in a live stream. I think it's going to be Charles or Max, or one of the McLaren drivers. Not necessarily Lando, but probably Lando, I would think. But I think Max has probably got the best. Chances, whom I got my money on, all the rest of it. Let's just talk about their situations. There's not that much publicity around Max at the moment, I don't think. Everyone sort of takes him for granted, and there he is in the same old Red Bull, not many changes, good old Max. We're going to rely on him to be there. Of course, he is good old Max, and he is very, very good, and he will be there. He'll be there every race, and he'll be thinking, or they will be thinking at Red Bull behind closed doors, these first few races, still a bit of a rush for everybody, starting with a double header. It's kind of a difficult start to the year, flyaway races. This is when we're really good. This is when other people will make mistakes. They'll drop the ball a little bit here on organizational things. And this is what we do well. If we can pick up some good points in the first 2 or 3 races, we're off to a good start. And that's what Max does, isn't he? He'll be very good, I think, in these first few races, even if the car isn't 100% a match for the McLaren. McLaren, as I say, they've got. I mean, it couldn't, in a way, it couldn't be a worse place for Lando to be starting in the world of Oscar Piastri, because I think there's a lot of stuff now at the moment. Suddenly Lando's the big favourite for the world championship. I don't know whether they've just discovered him or whether they've just looked at a picture of him and thought, wow, he's a cool guy, or whatever it is. I mean, he's the same driver that he was before, as far as I can see. So I don't know why everybody's suddenly jumping up and down about him. Of course he's going to go well. Of course he's going to win Grand Prix this year. But as I keep saying, his biggest problem is not Max, it's not Charles, it's not Lewis, it's not George Russell. It's Oscar Piastri. And actually the pressure from Piastri in the other side of the garage is something that Lando Norris, if this is going to be a championship year for him, does not need. Championships are not usually won in years when drivers of the quality of Lando have the sort of pressure in the other side of the garage of drivers of the quality of Oscar Piastri. Now, it could well be that somehow there's been some subterfuge and or ignorance at McLaren, and they've managed to detune Piastri to the point where he's now trying to drive like Lando and not succeeding at Lando's level, and he's always going to be just behind Lando, in which case that's great for Lando, and then, of course, he's got a great chance to win the World Championship. But if Oscar does continue to goes back to where he was and then continues to grow from there as a pretty good short corner driver, then I still say he's going to have a problem, because Oscar is very good when he's got himself sorted. But we'll see in Australia. There'll be a lot of pressure on him, a lot of focus on him. And I suspect he'll be probably quite confused as to how to drive. And anyway, there's not many places around Melbourne where you can, even if you're a great short corner driver like Max, where you can really show that and use that to your advantage. Of course, other things enable you to be a great short corner driver, which is touch and feel and rhythm and balance at the right moment, all of which Lewis has, Charles has, Max has, and I think Oscar has a lot of. And if he can use all that and stop all the noise, it'll be a really interesting first race, if nothing else, for the battle between Oscar and Lando. And then Lando's got this great quality of letting the car float with no throttle or brakes under real pressure when he needs to get a time out of the soft tyres in Q3. I'm not sure, again, there are many corners around Melbourne where you can benefit from that either, from that talent. So it's a bit of a street fight, Melbourne, in the sense that it's just a scratchy race. Variables come into play, and who do you see coming down the middle of all that? Max Verstappen. That's his sort of weekend, isn't it? And then George Russell. If you think Lando's got a great chance to win the World Championship, I think George Russell has as well. He's very, very quick, and he's absolutely super confident. He's got the entire Mercedes team behind him, and not just the race team, the entire thing, everything to do with Mercedes. That's a massive thing. So, he's going to be good, isn't he? He's going to win races for sure. Whether it's enough races to win a championship is another matter, of course. I'm stating the obvious here, but don't discount him. And then you've got Ferrari, which is, Lewis and Charles. And I've always said Charles right up there with Lewis and Max in terms of his natural talent, his ability to create short corners, his softness of touch. He does have his emotional soft underbelly. And let's see if he's learning from Lewis. And I think that's a very important point about those two guys, Hamilton and Leclerc, is that they're both mature enough and intelligent enough to learn from one another. And that's quite spooky for everybody else. And I think Charles will learn from Lewis's attitude and his demeanor in and out of the car. And I think Lewis will suddenly fire himself up again when he sees what Charles doing into corners and start to really get on top of what he used to do so well at Mercedes before they lost their way. So all in all, I don't know. I'd say Max. I mean, if I really had to think about it, I suppose I would say Max.
I don't think that's a bad shout, given what we know and have seen from Mr. Verstappen over the past 36 months. Let me ask you about Lando, though, Peter, because I've listened to a couple of interviews that Lando's conducted, one with NBC over the past 24 hours, and there's a growing question around whether Lando has the temperament requisite to challenge a Max or a Lewis for a championship over 24 races. To that question, Lando said something to the effect of, I am who I am, and I'm not going to change that. All different types of personality have won World Drivers' Championships in the past. You don't always have to be this ruthless killer of a driver to get yourself over the line. To that, Mr. Windsor, you say what, sir?
Oh, I agree with Lando. I think he does, and he's totally correct. Many different personalities have won championships, and of course he has the tenacity, he has the longevity, he has the concentration and the self-belief to take on all those guys. I think it was a poorly worded question, to be honest, because what they should have said is, do you think you have, what was it, the whatever mental strength to fight Oscar Piastri in the other McLaren? That's the question. As I keep saying, it's no. Of course, Lando can take it to Lewis or Charles or Max. Of course, he's a very, very good racing driver. But is he the sort of guy that can handle the politics at McLaren if Oscar Piastri wins the first 3 races? Ooh. That's my question, and that's a much better question. And I'm shocked that was it NBC? You said didn't ask that question. That's the question that should be asked. Anybody who knows anything about the sport knows that Lando can do it against the opposition. It's having a guy as good as Piastri that's the problem. If he had Ricciardo alongside him, none of this, we wouldn't even be talking about this because it's a great combination. But Piastri's a quick driver and he wins Grand Prix, and he isn't going to go away. He isn't just going to say, oh, well, now I've given up now. I'm going to be number 2 to Lando this year. No problem. He isn't going to do that. I can tell you that right now.
There's a portion in Drive to Survive, Peter, where Lando, you see the dichotomy, the difference between Max and Lando brought to bear. Max Verstappen says something to the effect of, I'm an F1 driver. That's my job. That's all that I've ever wanted to do. The rest of it, I don't care for. I don't care what people think. Lando Norris cut to him and he says, I think I care too much about what people think. I think I say too much and are always talking too much truth, and that doesn't help me. I think there's something in that, maybe not under the umbrella heading of mental fortitude, Peter, but I think I think there is lap time in Max Verstappen's approach as versus Lando's, and that won't help Lando going into 2025, even if he does have the quickest car.
No, and again, you still have to think about what questions from the TV guys at the back prompted all those so-called sound bites. I mean, the reality is, and I'm sure Lando, well, maybe he doesn't. As I said before, the problem for Lando is that he's got this absurdly large social media platform upon which he feels he needs to say something periodically, I suppose, that's from the heart. And as I said to you, but I think we did a live stream long ago, a year ago probably, he needs to just get off social media completely. That's how he'll solve that problem overnight. Then you'll become a Max Verstappen. It's easy. Stop doing all the social media stuff. Very easy to do. And that's why probably he gets a bit confused about maybe I'm a bit too honest and maybe I'm a bit too open. Of course he's a bit too open. You don't see Max doing all that stuff out on social media. Of course not. He's much too busy doing other stuff, driving rally cars or whatever, doing some fun things. Lando's got too much time on his hands to be doing all that stuff, really. He should be just focusing on racing and winning and nothing else. As I say, his problem, it's a big problem because he's got his close relationship with Zach. He's got the whole McLaren team being one huge happy family, all glad, happy. And, if Oscar Piastri starts to get it together, that's when we got to see Lando Norris deliver. That's the big difference. And it's always been a problem in a team where you have two drivers of that quality. And it'll be a problem at Ferrari if things start to go in one way or the other, whether it be for Charles or for Lewis. It won't be a problem at Mercedes because it's very weighted towards George. And it won't be a problem at Red Bull because it's very weighted towards Max. So that's why I keep saying the right driver combinations are the ones where if you say you've got a Lando Norris, then you certainly don't need an Oscar Piastri in the other car. Have a Daniel Ricciardo or a Valtteri Bottas or even a Carlos Sainz, I would say, but don't have an Oscar Piastri. And if you've got an Oscar Piastri, you don't need a Lando. Now, a lot of people might say, oh, well, what about the Constructors' Championship? Well, I say, what about it? It's boring, isn't it? Who cares about that? But we're talking about the Drivers' Championship, aren't we? So, that's why I'm saying all this. If you only want to win the Constructors' Championship, no problem. Put the best two guys you can get together. I'm talking about the Drivers' Championship.
It's a good shout. It is a very good shout. And again, I know you haven't watched the Drive to Survive episode about which I'm going to talk, but in there, Peter,
well, I don't have a sub to Netflix, so if somebody wants to pay for one, I suppose I might watch it. Although I just don't know if I have the time. I just never ever have a spare moment, so I can't even imagine having to sit down and watch more stuff.
There's interesting bits. I know that they're not always factually accurate, which is again creative license,
really?
but we can talk about that. But there's a piece in there. I know for the longest time you've been beating the drum about Monza in particular, and that Zach Brown and McLaren should have gotten their arms around Oscar Piastri. And there's no way that he should be trying to put a wheel up the outside of his teammate into the second chicane. And there is an episode, Peter, where it feels like they've been watching your material.
Oh, good.
Finally, Zach Brown says, "Mea culpa. We should have had our hands around that. We've cost ourselves potentially a 1-2 by being too indecisive and or passive about team orders." Finally, Peter, finally.
Well, I'm glad they're watching my show and taking some instructions. I'll give them some more instructions, no doubt, as the year progresses. But yeah, for me, it was that second chicane risk that was taken by Piastri. Completely ludicrous, because if you're going to do anything, just let the first chicane happen, and once that's happened at Monza, then you settle down, think about the Lesmos, think about Ascari, think about you don't start playing around with the second chicane on the outside if you're teammates. And then the other point, of course, is that they shouldn't have been racing one another, and Lando and Oscar, that because of that, they were chiming off one another in terms of the pace they were running, which is why they destroyed their tires. And that again, so they're culpable in two aspects of the race. One, the second chicane, but then that led on to very poor team orders after that. Now all Charles had to do was cruise around and look after his tires and win the race, which is exactly what he did. It brings me back to my point. Again, if it was Daniel Ricciardo and Lando Norris in that team at McLaren at Monza, Lando Norris would have won that Grand Prix for sure.
Oh,
and that's why you don't break up something that's good. It's crazy. And don't think I don't rate Oscar. I do. I think Oscar would be phenomenal in whatever he drives. I just don't think it's great for Lando Norris to have Oscar in the other car. That's all. For his championship chances. That's all.
Go on then, Mr. Windsor. Let's talk about Scuderia Ferrari, because there's a lot of chat. And again, Sir Lewis Hamilton fans are convinced that Lewis has gotten his halo back. You've seen the pictures with him standing in front of the Ferrari F40. Surely then the hype has to be real. This is Sir Lewis's swan song. He's absolutely going to win the 8th. Charles Leclerc doesn't have the speed or temerity or racecraft to beat Sir Lewis Hamilton. Not a 7-time champion. Never ever. Surely, Peter. Surely.
You're making that up, aren't you, Cameron? Nobody's that stupid to say all of that. They can't be. Of course, Lewis is hoping that he will win an 8th championship, if not a 9th as well, I would imagine. And as I said before, I think he will win Grand Prix this year. That isn't saying very much, but he will win this year. He's still super quick, and the car and the team don't look at all bad, do they? So they'll be there. But I think if it's a good car, I think Charles Leclerc's going to be the guy over a 24 race championship that will be the most likely Ferrari driver to be world champion because he's Charles Leclerc and he's as good as he is and he's got the history with the team that he has and he knows how to do it. And he'll be learning from Lewis. As I keep saying, that's a very important point. He'll probably learn more from Lewis than Lewis will from Charles, but nonetheless, they'll both benefit from one another. And that's quite a healthy thing. I'm kind of contradicting myself now in saying how well these two unbelievably quick racing drivers will get on together, having said that the Piastri Lando Norris thing's a poor marriage. But I say that about Lewis and Charles because they are of a different ilk and they're different stages of their careers. And they are both drivers that have spent their entire careers being self-critical. And it's very easy for other drivers to say, oh, yeah, I'm always self-critical. What they mean is, yeah, I'm always sitting down with the race engineer to see how I can go quicker. That's what they really mean. What Charles and Lewis have is an ability to admit their own shortcomings and their mistakes and to learn from those. And that's, when you put those two together, it's dynamite, really, I think. And as I say, I think Charles, because he's the younger, will have more to gain from that, but Lewis will gain as well. And I think overall, they're looking really good. It's not a bad operation at all right now. And I think Freddie Vasseur's done well to reject the whole Adrian Newey bandwagon thing and just focus on what they do well and just bring that home in the way they know they can do it. And never underestimate Freddie Vasseur in terms of his ability to, a little bit like a race driver who thinks about the last 10 laps of a race, even before the start. Freddie Vasseur's got that ability as well as a team manager, team principal, whatever you want to call him. He's actually technical advisor or something now as well, I think. So yeah, there's a lot of good people there and a lot of good feeling. And I think Ferrari will have a really, really good year.
Here's hoping, Mr. Windsor. I desperately hope. I'm still full of fear as a Sir Lewis Hamilton fan. like we said last time round, I really wish that Lewis had joined Ferrari like 2 years ago. Because then, because of Charles' mistakes and his kind of his wavering attention span, I would have backed Lewis every single day of the week. But now it feels like Charles all of a sudden has remembered how to not make mistakes, and I just feel like
he's learning from Lewis. It's a much calmer atmosphere in the garage. That's what you're seeing already. As I say, it's a much calmer atmosphere. Lewis has got this self-confidence and this ability to, on the one hand, shake hands with the mechanics and have a bit of a laugh with them. On the other hand, be a global superstar that's almost untouchable. And that's a really impressive thing to see. And a 7 times world champion has managed to keep his sort of Rye House karting motivation 100% alight. And that's it's unique. It's never happened in the history of Formula One that a driver that successful has kept that sort of motivation. And it's amazing to watch. And I'm sure Charles, as intelligent as he is, and as self-critical as he is, will be just drinking and eating this for dinner because he's got a close-up, right at the front of the stage view of Lewis Hamilton and how to go about it. And that can only be good for him. That can only be good for him. And he doesn't even need to talk. He just needs to watch and listen and breathe it in, and he'll be a better race driver straight away. And you're right, people are seeing that. And Charles will be, I think it would be amazing this year.
It doesn't bode well. Talk to me about Lewis.
Well, it does bode well. I mean, if Lewis wins a few more Grand Prix, I think all Hamilton fans should be very happy. If he happens to win a world championship, I don't believe in luck per se, but it's going to have to involve a lot of variables coming into play that turn things in his direction. And that's fine. He may win another world championship, but the championship he should have won was that 21 championship. That's very clear, and some others as well. And as I say, if he finishes his career with 4 or 5 wins at Ferrari, what a great way to end.
So talk to me about Lewis very quickly, Peter. I think I don't think I've ever asked you this question because, again, this is one that splits the community. Some will say of Lewis and his extracurricular activities, Met Gala, fashion, music, et al., that you need to indulge Lewis Hamilton's interest to get the best out of it. That there is indeed lap time in Lewis being a free spirit outside of the cockpit. On the other side of that fence, you'll have die-hard purists that say no, an F1 driver is an F1 driver only. And if you're at home, you should be studying, you should be looking at the telemetry, that you shouldn't have a life outside of F1. And there's lap time in that.
Complete and utter rubbish. I mean, obviously Lewis has got it right, because he wouldn't still be as good as he is if he didn't have it right. And being able to take a breath of fresh air and get out of the Formula One paddock and think about real life and enjoy the people in real life and the things in real life that is part of his DNA is 100% critical to Lewis being Lewis Hamilton. And of course you let him do all that. Any race driver who doesn't do that needs their head examined, to be honest, because Formula One paddock is an incredibly lugubrious place. I mean, people just walk around looking as if they've trodden in something pretty unpleasant 90% of the time. Oh, we're not allowed to talk. Bodyguards everywhere, security guards everywhere, closed windows everywhere, signs saying only allowed in with special permission signs everywhere. It's not a great place to be. Yeah, you've got your own little meeting room, you've got your engineers, you've got the laptops, you've got all that stuff. But after 4 or 5 days of that, all you want to do is get out and go to the Met, go to the fashion shows, don't you? And get a life again and start breathing again and be a normal person. And I think it's anyone who doesn't do that, think that that's bad for Lewis. Really, I feel quite sorry for them, really, because that's obviously the way to go. And Lewis has got that balance absolutely right, and 100% take my hat off to him for that.
Good shout. Go on then. Let's talk about the balls that are red, Mr. Windsor, because a lot of people have said that they didn't have, or at least during testing, it looked like they haven't really evolved the car since RB20. That all the panels, all the exterior panels, pretty much look like the same, and they haven't done much, if indeed they want to bridge the gap in terms of lap time to McLaren. What do you make of that, Peter? Do you think that Red Bull are going to come in as slow as the odds makers are giving them credit for?
Here's Dexter. Hello, Dex. What I make of that is that Red Bull have said, right, 26 is obviously a completely new year. We need to be hitting the ground running. A lot of work going into that, a lot of design, time, budget, everything else we need to focus on. What do we do well? We run a race team well. We got great racing drivers. Let's just focus on the racing. We know from over an average, we may be slightly below par technically all year, but we'll make up for it. We're good racers and we'll just get on with it and go racing. Stroke Jonathan Wheatley, of course, Jonathan Wheatley era, of course, which will be another interesting thing. So, I give him a little bit like I give Fred Vasseur 10 out of 10 for saying, look, I'm fed up with all this Adrian Newey stuff. Ferrari are going to do what they do well. I know the good people. We're going to get on with it. I don't want any more of this noise. Thank you. I think Red Bull have kind of done the same thing in terms of the 2025 car. We know what we do well. We're not going to spend 4 months now trying to build a car as good or slightly better than the McLaren. We'll just do it on the racetrack, thank you very much, with tyre strategy, with Max Verstappen, with Liam Lawson, and we'll go motor racing and get on with it. And I like that, at least they've made a decision and they're getting on with it. And we can sit back and watch the racing now from Red Bull. 2 unbelievable racers in that team, and what a team.
Going to be chaos.
Well, it is. Yeah, It's a lot about chaos. I mean, Liam will hit a few things probably, but he's very, very good. And we know about Max.
Yeah. Go on then, Mr. Windsor. It'd be remiss of me not to mention, again, proper chaos going on at the FIA. Dave Richard, chairman even of the UK Motorsport Council, I want to say, apparently he's due to take legal action against Mohammed Ben Sulayam. There was set to be a meeting and Mohammed Ben Sulayam turned around and said, you can't enter, you guys, members of this council or committee, you guys can't enter unless you sign this impromptu NDA. Help me make sense of this, Mr. Windsor. What are we doing at the FIA? Is it high time now that the F1, the FOM considers divorcing permanently from the FIA, at the very least under Mohammed Ben Sulayam's stewardship?
Well, I think, as we mentioned last time, blame Bernie for all this, because when he solved the 81 visa FOCA crisis, his solution was to let the FIA be what they are and to give Jean-Marie Balest all this, wonderful, he's the new president, the king, welcome at all the races, the gold pass, and let him be what he wanted to be for the next 3 or 4 years and let him fade away. And then he used the FIA to get, whatever he wanted in the world because he put his man Max in there. So you can blame Bernie for all of that. He kept it all alive. And here we are, all these years later, we've basically got another Balest running the FIA, and we're all surprised. Oh, isn't it terrible? Well, it's not terrible. It just goes back to where we were, which is a ludicrous voting system where every country has one vote. And if you want to change it, change the voting system first. Otherwise, you're always going to have sort of Balests in there, Balest clones, if you like. Obviously, different parts of the world, different nationalities. But what you're seeing today is really no different from how everybody felt about Balest at the time. So the next point is, can F1 operate without the FIA? Of course they could. I think it would be unbelievably difficult to do it from an administrative point of view. And that's where the FIA do a very good job still. Of course, they've got, you need to make sure you got round pegs in round holes in terms of the senior jobs at a racetrack. But the solution, I think, is for them to be administrative, but for Formula One to have a lot more control over the personnel and how it's done. And you could say, well, that's vested interest then. Ferrari may want this guy and Red Bull may want that guy. That's a problem. I agree with that. But then again, it's better if it's done by committee rather than just by the FIA, I think. But in answer to your question, I think that they could survive. And I've always said, and this was an argument about the Concord Agreement, I've always said that if Ferrari at any given moment said to themselves, we're fed up with having to share all this money, and we've got another team coming in now and it's even less money for us, and Formula One's too commercial, whatever they want to say, we're going to set up our own championship. We're going to do a deal with 10 different countries. We're going to have Grand Prix all over the world. It's going to have a Ferrari-based Formula One engine. We'll have Dallara chassis. Ferrari factory team will be there. There'll be massive money from a huge television deal we've just done, and we're going to run beyond the FIA jurisdiction. We're going to do our own thing, like NASCAR, for example. But, it could succeed. It could happen. It could only happen if Ferrari did that and took themselves, obviously, out of the FIA Formula One. No other team would have that sort of power, but it could happen. And that was always Bernie's fear. And that was always on the edge, the brink of, is the next Concord Agreement going to be signed, would be, that in the background somewhere. So that could still happen. Of course, it could still happen. We've seen Liv, Ferrari sat down with the Saudi, whatever it is, private fund, blah, 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 and said, right, we want to do a championship and you guys can own it with us jointly. And it's going to be a massive Ferrari Saudi fund championship. And it's going to be, already we've got, Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc and blah, blah, blah. Who's to say that wouldn't work?
That's incredible.
Yeah,
wow.
Of course it would work. And you could do that. But it's a big effort. And right now, I think Liberty would feel that they're doing a good enough job to be able to keep everybody under control, particularly Ferrari. And they probably are. And so that won't happen, I don't think. But the only way, as I say, going back now to the FIA presidential thing, it's just basically the Balest thing that Bernie perpetuated. Because the answer in 81 was not to have Balest there and to let the FIA just be administrators and nothing else, effectively owned completely by Formula One. But the solution at the time was to let Balest breathe and become king of his little castle, and wind up people like Ayrton Senna.
History, they say in F1, doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme, Peter.
Well, it is repeating. It doesn't repeat. It's just continued. That's not even repeating. It's continued. If you think about it, think about the presidents we've had. It was obviously Max, and that basically gave Bernie complete and utter control of world motorsport for an entire period he was there, which is how he was able to do all those deals that, with the rights and everything else. It was all because Max was there. And then we had Jean Todt, who Bernie thought would be very much a Bernie guy, and he turned out to be a lot more of a free thinker, and I think that surprised Bernie. But nonetheless, he was kind of one of them. He was the Ferrari guy, and I think that kept Ferrari in Formula One within the sort of basic realms of where we are now, the FIA. The best thing that could have happened, in my opinion, was that if Ari Vatanen had become president instead of Jean Todt. And he very nearly got it. And I think he would have been a really, really good president of the FIA. And it's a great shame that Ari didn't get that. Partly not, and I don't think he would have gone, let's do something for rallying. I think he's a very, very intelligent, sharp man. But beyond that, he's a good man. He's got a real heart and a real soul. And it's a great shame for the sport, I think, that Vatanen didn't get that presidency.
Peter, I want to ask you
He
about.
just didn't go to enough countries and pay them for the one vote. That was the
So
problem. I'm not saying it was corrupt. I'm just saying he just didn't do what other people did.
it's a patronage, isn't it? But again, that's these are the cards we've been dealt. As we round third base, Mr. Windsor, I want to ask you again. I want to come back to George Russell, because George in the off season has been very vocal, let's say, about Max Verstappen in particular. It feels like he's just extending, doubling down on all of the rhetoric that we saw at the Qatar Grand Prix, where he said Max Verstappen is a bully and somebody needs to stand up to him. I'm wired that way. If nobody else is going to do it, I'm going to do it. He's saying very similar things over the past 5-7 days, that Max has been people have allowed him to run roughshod over the 20 currently on the grid. I'm not wired that way and I can't tolerate it. My parents wouldn't stand for it if I allowed somebody like Max Verstappen, or anyone else for that matter, to bully me like Max has the other 19. What do you make of that, Peter? Is that the way? Is George Russell being clever in the way that he's going about his activities going into 2-5?
No, I don't think he is. I think that's, we were talking earlier about the difference between Max and Lando, and how Lando's saying, I say too much and maybe I'm a bit too honest, and Max just goes away. Well, of course, if you feel that another driver deserves a whack across the face or whatever, don't talk about it. Do it. That's the basic rule of thumb, isn't it? The more you talk about it, the more the other guy is just going to be thinking, yeah, right, okay, let's see you. I've got a memory of turn one into Qatar at a restart. Wasn't Max Verstappen quite impressive there from memory?
He does a massive restart, Peter.
The only thing I can think of is that George is thinking, I'm going to say all this, and next time Max is inside me, and and I'm going to outbrake him, he's going to let me go because he's going to be worried that I'm going to take him out. Yeah, right. I think I'm surprised actually that Toto hasn't got on top of this. I suppose Toto's not enough of a street fighter gangster himself, is he? So he needs to think about, he needs to think of that about a little more. Maybe employ a couple of guys just to advise George on how to do it, and just keep his mouth shut. No social media, thank you. Keep your powder dry, as Bernie would say, and just do it. You do it on the track. Don't do it in the press conferences. And then he might get a result. You never know. But I still have in the back of my mind that horrendous shunt he had with Bottas in Imola. And I still think, we got to be careful about George. Or George has to be a little bit careful about what he does on the edge. He had found a really good sweet spot with his driving. And he doesn't need to let this be a distraction. Because I think George on the edge, because he's still a bit spiky in terms of his inputs, and because he's still a late breaker, it could all end in tears. And I'd hate to see that happen actually, because George is so good, but he can be very, very aggressive.
And this is the problem, right, Peter? That less talk, more action, I think is what people are looking to see from George Russell, and how Max Verstappen.
But more importantly, surely everybody would be saying Max is unbelievably successful and unbelievably good. What are some of his hallmarks that perhaps I could emulate? And wouldn't you say to yourself, well, let's talk more action? Wouldn't you say that? Wow, he doesn't do much social media. Maybe I should do the same. I'm always perpetually astonished in Formula One by drivers that don't look at drivers who are doing it well and learn from them. I'm not talking necessarily about on the track now. I mean, that's an obvious point that very few drivers ever go out on the track to look. Liam Lawson and interestingly George were out on track in Bahrain. But in general, they don't tend to look at it, do they? They don't tend to say, well, all that stuff, going to the Met Gala and fashion shows seems to work for Lewis. Maybe I should try and do the same thing. They don't do that, do they? They say, oh no, I'm going to go and work harder in the gym and harder with the engineers and I'm working hard. Yuki Tsunoda, working hard. All working hard. Doing what? Looking at computer screens. They're not actually doing what they should be doing. Daniel Ricciardo, I'm sure Daniel, when he went to Renault and then he went to McLaren, instead of saying, right, I'm on holiday now for a couple of years, I'm just going to breathe freely, I'm just going to be a race driver, let all my natural instincts take over. I don't want any of that telemetry rubbish, just get on with it. I think he'd be a better race driver. And particularly at McLaren, I think he probably got swamped with telemetry and numbers and drowned under the weight of it all.
I think this is the point, Peter, that there's no there's no panacea for any driver. That each driver, I think this is the point that Lando's making earlier with the personality types, right? That whilst for Lewis going across to the Met Gala or signing a contract with Lululemon or whoever, that unlocks his lap time. But for Lando, that might not be the right answer. That might not be the exam answer to unlock the best lap time, if there is such a thing.
Well, I think short term, you're probably right, because he's been doing this other stuff for so long. Oh, better do Twitter, better keep up with Instagram. Oh, better, or go and have lunch with Zach, or go to the factory. He's been doing that all his life. He doesn't know any different. Lewis has been doing the other stuff for most of his life. He doesn't know any different. You've got to do what obviously suits you. And it's not a question of just suddenly making a change and get an instant result. But it's not difficult. I keep saying, if I was running Lando, it's not that difficult to say to Lando, right, no more social media till the end of your Formula One career. You do enough interviews anyway with sponsors and all that other stuff. You don't need all that social media rubbish. No more Netflix. Just get on and be a racing driver. That's what I would say to him.
I mean, what Lando's been doing hitherto hasn't been working right, which is
Well, it's not that he's been doing pretty well. I just think you'd really sharpen the edge of Lando if you did that, and you'd have him ready for when Oscar Piastri's whole thing starts to happen again, which it will. Trust me, it will. And that's the main thing. He needs to be razor sharp ready politically and mentally for when the Oscar Piastri thing begins, and that's not easy. And as for George, he's kind of, I don't know. I hate to think what Dennis Jenkinson would say about George Russell if he was around today. Dennis Jenkinson, the doyen of British Formula One writers, journalists, won the 55 millimeter with Sterling Moss. Great journalist, very critical. I mean, he was never a Francois Sever fan, for example, because of the way Sever looked and the way he was always a little bit more of a male model than he was a racing driver in Jenkinson's eyes. And I think he would perceive George a little bit like that. He'd think, this guy's not a real racer, is he? He's not a Jean Berra. Compare George Russell with Jean Berra, And so George, I think, if anything, maybe he's thinking, I need to show I'm a tough guy. And, I am a Jean Berra and I can go and do this stuff. And you can't play around with me, George Russell. And now I'm no longer president of the GPDA. I'm not going to worry about who I have an incident with or whatever. As I say, I'll tell you who'd be a good manager for George Russell, Bernie Eccleston.
Oh.
He should sign Bernie. Bernie can stay at home and wherever in Stad, but what he should do is have Bernie phone him every week and just keep his feet on the ground of how to handle situations. And I can tell you now, 99% of Bernie's advice would be say nothing, do it on the track. Do nothing. It would be that.
Nice and straightforward.
Keep your powder dry. Yeah, it would be.
Keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah. But of course, because George lives in this world of Mercedes, I say glad, happy families of committees and everybody happy, and isn't it all wonderful? We're all happy. Great car. It didn't go very well this weekend, but we expected that. Don't worry, we'll go well the next weekend. It's all fine. Everybody's working very hard, incredibly hard. Nobody else is working hard. The whole Mercedes thing, massive 27-page press release about a new deal they've done on, I don't know, saving the planet. Nothing to do with motor racing or Formula One, but anyway, that's fine. That's the way they do things. Speaking of which, I was walking Dexter this morning and saw this Mercedes roundel thing on the ground and opened it up. And it was actually a brand new Mercedes keyring thing. I thought, bloody hell, some Mercedes owner has bought that and just chucked the keyring out the window.
Wow.
Disgusted with the car. No, I'm sure it wasn't that. But I was talking to Jack, my son, the other day, and he's saying, Daddy, why are Mercedes not in rallying? What's going on? I said, well, they're in Formula One. He said, yeah. They've never done anything in rallying. That means their cars can't be very good. I said, well, that's an interesting point, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a good
They're
shout.
probably not very good. When was the last time Mercedes actually built a decent car? I shouldn't be saying all this, should I? But they're so boring, aren't they?
Their road cars are quite sexy. I think they're doing well. Yeah, their road cars are in London.
I would disagree with that.
In London, that's all that anybody drives. Sexy. I mean, if we're talking handling dynamic, then that's a completely different thing, Peter.
First of all, let's not call SUVs cars. That's the first thing. They're not cars. So what are we talking about here? Not much left, actually.
It's true. It's a good shout. Your C-Class and your G63, maybe. Those are what everybody's after.
Well, I don't know which Merc it was, but it was a quick AMG Merc in the last 5 or 6 years. I think do they still do one with gull wing doors?
Yeah, that's the Oh, what is that?
AMG, blah. Anyway, I don't know what it is. Anyway, it was a quick
AMG GT.
supercar. Is that? Would it be a supercar?
AMG GT has that, I think. The Goldwood.
Rob Wilson was at Goodwood a few years ago, and during the lunch break, some bloke who had bought one of these came up to Rob and said, "I've got my car here, Rob. It's this AMG Mercedes, blah blah blah." And it's a really great car, quick car, but I've never really driven it on the limit. So Rob's thinking, well, how does he know it's a great car in that case? Anyway, and he said, "Oh, I wonder, can you take it for a few laps and tell me what you think about it? I'd love to know what it's really like, when it's on the limit." And I hope Rob won't mind me saying this, but he did 3 or 4 laps, and he said it was one of the most frightening cars he'd ever driven in his life. Massive flick oversteer.
Wow.
Just didn't feel to have any structural rigidity of any kind. It was just terrible. And he said, amateur drivers in that thing would get into real trouble if they were going quickly. But, it had such a high level of grip that to get to that point was impossible on the public road, of course. And so it was no problem. It's no problem as a car in terms of safety, but actually on the limit, unbelievably bad. Interesting.
Snap oversteer, not unlike their W15 and W14 and W13 over the last couple of years.
Well, yeah, and from that they developed the Formula One cars. Snap oversteer for all.
100%.
Well, it's not only snap oversteer; it was no front end grip as well, I think, wasn't it? Or changing front end grip. I think that was the other thing that's so irritating there.
Snap oversteer.
Yeah, and a sort of lovely moving center of pressure up and down the car all the time, so you never know where you're at.
Yeah, perfect.
Wonderful.
Perfect.
I'm sure Merca got it 100% right now, and they're going to have a brilliant year, brilliant car.
I mean, sod's law though, Peter. It wouldn't be unlike them to then, as soon as Lewis leaves, they go and design a fantastic car that's a world beater, feeding into the sabotage theories of Sir Lewis Hamilton fans.
No, much more importantly, how are you going to react, Cameron, when they say, look, they get rid of Lewis, who had no idea about technical setup, and now they've got 2 good guys who really know what they're doing, and look at the change at Mercedes. I mean, so good they got rid of Lewis. What was he doing? No chance. They were just going down dead-end alleys all the time with Lewis, and now look at them. What are you going to do when they say that?
But I mean, Lewis told them that he disagreed with the design philosophy tree that they were barking up, didn't he? So, I don't know.
It's all quite fun, isn't it?
Oh, Mr. Windsor, as you round third base, I want to ask you a final question.
I think it was a guy called Borlinger, wasn't it? Something like that. Long name and a long Mercedes. It was the last decent Mercedes rally car. He might have got an odd P3 back in the 50s or 60s, I think. Erwin Borling or something like that.
You know much more than me.
But they haven't. I mean, why don't they do some rallying? Get out there and really see if they're any good.
I think they're sadly not too many people watch rallying these days, Mr. Windsor. And I think
it's a good thing. It's a very good. Well, it's not strictly true, actually, Cameron. I mean, Monte Carlo, it was almost impossible to get out on the stages and get a decent vantage point because you basically just lock yourself into one stage on the Monte Carlo rally, and you got to sleep the night before, and then you got your place and you go. So I would contend that a lot of people do watch rallying. I don't think who cares about the social media world out there, but in terms of people who love rallying, seeing cars that look something like the cars you drive on the road is a really good thing, particularly for the next young generation.
I don't disagree, Peter, but it just doesn't have the as versus F1, it doesn't have the cachet. It doesn't have Mercedes around their shareholder table, the word that me and you both love. They will be saying, I need to get the most bang for my buck to augment our bottom line, our EBITDA. Is in that vein, is rallying a viable proposition? Not as viable at the very least as Formula One, I think they'd say. But
well, maybe not, but that's why a Hyundai i20N is a better car than a Merc.
Oh, let's go.
That's why, you don't have to say anymore. How many Mercs are like an i20N these days? Lovely 6-speed manual transmission, beautiful gearbox, brilliant engine, BMW-based engine, got to say. Incredible balance for a front-wheel drive car. Just a fabulous road car. I can't imagine any Mercs like that.
I think it's a controversial that this is now an automotive industry conversation, right? And I suppose that's why many people, Mr. Windsor, will argue. No, A, and then B, argue in real time that the automotive industry in Europe, that the likes of VW and Mercedes are all dying a death. Tesla too. Are getting swallowed whole by the likes of Hyundai and BYD, that like North Asian manufacturers that are just completely lapping these cars. Crazy.
Well, bring back low center of gravity, low roll center, lightweight, Bring back Gordon Murray.
I mean, yeah, that wouldn't be too bad, but we might be asking for too much there. He's just built one,
Yeah.
hasn't he, Peter? But I don't know that
Yes.
stage.
People should pay more attention to Gordon Murray. I mean, every big manufacturer now seems to go to a higher center of gravity, higher roll center, more weight, and it's just terrible.
SUV nation.
Anyway, let's get back to Formula One, as you say.
As we round third base, Mr. Windsor, always very generous with your time. I wanted you to chime in on Mr. Jim Clark. Again, his birthday was last week, wasn't it? He would have been 89.
Would he?
Last week, yeah. Birthday March the 4th, I think. Talk to me about Jim. Why, as somebody who didn't see Jim Clark race, I've heard the stories that he was incredible behind the wheel of a car, that he had this otherworldly feel and could do things with a car that not too many men or women in F1 history have been able to. Try and articulate to people that didn't see Jim behind the wheel of a car at the time, that maybe have never seen a Jim Clark race. What was it that made Jim Clark so special, and that what is it about Jim that makes F1 aficionados like yourself, Peter, declare him probably, beyond all reasonable doubt, the best F1 driver to have ever done
it? It's a very, very long conversation, Cameron. I think, in a nutshell, in the era in which he drove, the softness of his touch, his balance, his feel for the surface of the road, his coordination, his ability to feel a car on the edge, all those things were quite visible because of the cars of that time, the narrow tires, the way they moved. So you had a really, if Clark was in a Lotus Cortina, you could see that he was putting the car at the perfect angle, mid-corner. The front wheel would be off the ground. He'd be just a little bit over the curb, just to shorten the corner a little bit in the middle. And then everything would be perfectly straight on exit. If he was in a Lotus 30 with a terrible flexing chassis, very heavy, overpowered engine at the back, you'd see his inputs minimizing the effect of the chassis flex and still making the car look pretty good. But you'd see a car with a lot of opposite lock at any given moment. But when the opposite lock was applied, it was never that. It was always in a perfect harmony with the car. So it always looked like it was on a piece of string, and yet often the wheels a bit at a different angle to the rear. And that manifested itself in perfectly even tire wear on all four tires in a way that Dunlop, who were his main tire supplier for most of his career, had never seen on another driver and never would. And he was intelligent. We were talking about Charles and Lewis working off one another and benefiting from one another. Think about when Graham Hill rejoined Lotus in 67 with the new Lotus 49 with the Cosworth engine. Jim won first time out at Zandvoort. And I think Jim learnt from Graham Hill that year how not to break the Lotus 49. And Jim's reliability in that car was better than Graham's. And you could say a lot of it was just circumstance. Often in the case of Graham, it was a rotor button or a spark plug or something stupid. But then it was also drive shafts, and it was also suspension arms and pickup points and things like that. And Jimmy found in 67, if you look at the stats, he doesn't look to be as quick as Graham Hill. But he found, even within that very fragile car, he found a sweet spot of just keeping the thing on the road, to the point where he'd win the 67 US Grand Prix with the rear suspension half collapse, the inside right rear wheel canted to the left, but still won the race. Same with the 66 US Grand Prix. Nobody else won a race in that BRM H16 3-litre engine behind them, and yet Jimmy did. Very difficult engine, blowing out oil and rubbish the whole time, but he managed to keep the thing going for a Grand Prix distance. So he had this amazing mechanical sympathy, manifesting itself probably better than any other time at the 65 British Grand Prix, when he had the Coventry Climax fuel-injected V8 behind him and 1.5 litre, and leading Graham Hill by about 25 seconds with 20 laps to go. He started to lose oil pressure and knew that there was very little chance he was going to win that Grand Prix. So he started to think, no radio in those days, no way of communicating with Colin Chapman in the pit lane, or Dick Scammell, who was chief mechanic at the time, went on to run Cosworth. But he took it upon himself to think, right, through Stowe and Club, the corners with the highest G, which could do the most damage to the bearings if I'm losing oil, I'm just going to switch off the engine, which he did. And so he would coast through those two corners, and then he'd declutch and get the run up to Abbey again. So Chapman didn't know he was doing this, because when he came out of Woodcote down pit straight, it sounded pretty much as normal. All he could see was Graham Hill catching him. And Jimmy was making a few hand signals. And he won the race, just won the race. Under pressure, he was brilliant. 64 European Grand Prix, Graham Hill in his mirrors the whole way, in probably what was a BRM at least as quick as the Lotus 33. Jimmy, no mistakes, just perfect under pressure. And out of the car, as I said at the beginning of this chat, he was very Russell Henley in terms of his demeanor after a Grand Prix win. He was a bit shy, a bit embarrassed by all the ballyhoo, as he would call it, and the garland would be around his neck, and he'd put on a pullover maybe and wave to the crowd. But there wouldn't be a lot of self-congratulatory, I'm brilliant, I can win this, I can win the championship, I'm number one. None of that stuff. It was always very reserved, and I'm lucky to be a part of this sport. I love this sport from the point of view of driving interesting cars in interesting ways on interesting circuits. And it's a privilege for me to do it. 67 Eifelrennen on the South Circuit at the Nürburgring, a circuit that doesn't exist today. There was ice on the border of the track. There was probably black ice on the road. There were trees bounding the circuit all the way around. It's about an 8-mile lap, a bit like a mini Nürburgring. Ice, snow, trees. And there was talk before the race amongst the drivers that maybe they shouldn't do it because it was a bit dodgy. And Jimmy was one of the drivers. He said, no, we've got 120,000 spectators here. We need to put on a show. Let's start the race. Get in the car. And so it went on. He was fit. He was polite. He was kind. He was humble. He loved driving racing cars. And I was lucky enough to sit down with him for 20 minutes or so and chat to him. And he knew me a little bit. I was a 13-year-old kid, but he spent 20 minutes with me, talking to me, allowing me to ask him questions and giving me support in a way that meant a lot to me in terms of where I wanted to go with my career. And put all that together, and you've got the greatest racing driver of all time, in my opinion. And don't forget, this year, and what was it, 60 years ago, 1965, he not only won the Formula One World Championship, securing it by the German Grand Prix in August, but he also won the Indianapolis 500 in that year and didn't do the Monaco Grand Prix in order to do that. Now, that is an achievement that will never, ever be matched, I don't think. It's never been done, of course, before. World Championship, F1 and Indy in the same year. And it probably never will be again. And that just shows how good Jim Clark was. And that wasn't the only thing he won in 65. He also won the Tasman Series, which I was lucky enough to see a part of. And he won numerous Formula 2 races, numerous touring car races, sports car races, and just never stopped. In fact, 65 for me, 1965 was one of the best years ever in the history of humanity, because Formula One was safe. The cars were perfectly suited to the circuits. If you look at a Lotus 33 at Clermont-Ferrand, quite a narrow track, undulating, mountainous, quite dangerous, obviously, in terms of no runoff area. But a Lotus 33 there just looks superb. And it was just before the cars started changing to sponsorship colours. So it's a green and yellow Lotus. It's Jimmy in the light blue Dunlop overalls. It's Jackie Stewart in the dark green BRM with the orange nose. Everything's quite small, but it fits and everything looks balanced and perfect. And Formula One was very safe that year. There were very few big accidents. There were no fatalities that I'm aware of in 65. And Indianapolis was a safe race as well in 65. Yep, some nasty things were going on in the world. There was the Vietnam War, and obviously there was all the racial unrest in the United States. But overall, 65 wasn't a bad year. I mean, the Beatles, it was before they went crazy and Flower Power, which was still a great time, but it was just before that. And it was when Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. were still wearing quite small lapels on their suits and the Ray-Bans, and the hats. They all wore hats, and Jimmy wore Island Sea cotton polo shirts and flannels and sort of brogue shoes, and always carried a briefcase when he was out of traveling, and quite often was in a Lotus Elan as his road car. Even in America, even at Indy, every day he had a Lotus Elan car was provided for him, which he drove around in. It was just a great era. What a great time. And it's and that was Jim Clark. Jeez. Great name too for a racing driver, isn't it? Jim Clark. Sounds quick, I think.
It sounds like the best F1 driver who's ever driven an F1 car, Mr. Windsor. And on that bombshell, sir, listen, if you're not already subscribed to Peter Windsor YouTube channel, then what are you doing with your life? After that soliloquy on Jim Clark, the greatest who have ever done it, get yourself over there and hit the subscribe. Shortly thereafter, go over to Short Corners on your favourite podcasting platform. Follow and 5 stars. If you are watching this on the YouTubes, I'd greatly appreciate it if you hit the like button, drop a comment, share with an F1 watching friend, and if you're listening to this on a podcasting platform, 5 stars and follow. Mr. Windsor, you've been a legend as always. Thank you so much for the time. Between now and next time, chat, remember to look but never stare.